you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Cecilia Estolano, the CEO of the Better World Group, and we are here today for what I think is going to be a really dynamic conversation with the women in California leading our climate future. So we've always been a leader in the environment and in innovation here in California, and the folks we're talking to today have really been part of that. Yeah, it's Women's History Month. We should have more than just a month for women. But whatever the case, it's a good gimmick to get you all to tune into this webinar and talk to some of the most amazing people in the country and working on issues of climate, on equity, on environmental justice. So I'm delighted to have you all here today. It's been quite a year, right? Unprecedented challenges, uncertainty, heartbreak, all of that. But we know that what's going to get us out of here is climate resiliency. And with a new administration that's focused on the types of investments we need to transition to a clean energy economy, we're also really excited about the possibility for California growing out of the COVID pandemic recession with better jobs and a cleaner environment. So we're going to talk about all of those things today in a brief 1-hour session. Let me just introduce our guests very briefly. You all probably know him. If you've tied in, you know him anyway. But in order, first, let me introduce Leanne Randolph, who was recently appointed the new chair of the California Air Resources Board. Leanne has deep experience in the state. She has served on the California Public Utilities Commission. She's been a deputy secretary and general counsel at the California Natural Resources Agency. And she's been chair of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. Oh my goodness, talk about glutton for punishment. Okay, and then we have Patty Monahan, who is a California Energy Commissioner. She's the lead commissioner on transportation. She has dedicated her career to advancing clean energy technologies, cutting harmful pollution with a focus on equity. We're also delighted to have Cynthia McLean-Hill, who is the president of the all-woman Los Angeles Board of Water and Power Commissioners. It's extraordinary. Cynthia is also in her day job, if she has any time outside of the DWP board, a managing director of the Strategic Council PLC. It's her firm is, she leads the regulatory, land use, and environmental law practices for her firm. Cynthia has long been a public servant. She has served on the LA's Police Commission. She served on the board of the Community Redevelopment Agency. And I first got to know Cynthia when we were children and served together on the California Coastal Commission. And then lastly, delighted to have Mary Leslie join us. Mary is president of the LA Business Council, which is great enough as it is, but we're also delighted that she just got reappointed to serve on the Board of Governors of the California Independent System Operator. The reason we can all connect by Zoom today, because she's doing the switching and making sure we get power all throughout the state of California. Under her leadership, Mary has made LABC really a leader in housing affordability, working on sustainability issues, and really caring about not just business, but jobs. And so we really welcome her. In her role in the California ISO board, she's responsible for overseeing our state's energy grid. So we're not going to do intros, introductory statements. These women know each other. These women are like making it happen for California. So we're going to go in with questions right away. I want to say also to the folks who tuned in, you're going to have an opportunity to, if you'd like, please at any time, submit questions in the chat box. And then we're going to have folks curate those. And we're going to spend some time at the end of this session taking some of those questions and directing them to our amazing panelists. Okay, so let's get right into it. Let me give you guys a softball. What are the biggest challenges we faced here in California in achieving our very ambitious renewable power and zero emission goals? Why don't we start off by the new chair of the California Air Resources Board, Leanne Randolph. Take it away.
Good morning. I guess I would say the biggest challenge I see is really the massive amount of coordination we need to do. We have multiple goals, and we have a lot of agencies and market participants that all need to work together to accomplish those goals. So we really need careful planning and coordination among agencies. We need collaboration with regional and local governments and community partners. And as we think about how we do this all in an equitable way, we need to figure out how best to bring communities into this work and to hear directly from them to understand what would be the most effective and the most equitable way to achieve these goals. So there's a lot of conversation and discussion and interaction that really needs to happen. And I'm excited about the opportunities to engage in those kind of collaborations with, the women here on this panel and with the communities and market participants out there doing this work.
Thanks, Leanne. Patty, what do you think sitting at the CEC? What's the biggest challenge we face?
To me, it's the speed that we need to make this transition. So, I mean, we're seeing increasing urgency to address this climate change catastrophe. We're approaching wildfire season. We all know what that means in terms of impacts to communities, impacts to air quality. And, so we have to move more swiftly, excuse me, in tackling this problem. We recently published together with the Air Resources Board and CAISO a joint study on what it's going to take to reach a 100% clean grid. And what we found is that we need to really ramp up renewables. We need to ramp up more resiliency in our grid. We have to have more storage. And, the area that I care passionately about is clean transportation. Half of the state's greenhouse gas emissions, when you account for the upstream emissions from fuel production, come from transportation. It's a huge source of smog-forming nitrogen oxides. Over 90% of toxic diesel particulates come from transportation. So we need to zero out pollution from transportation. And we need to build infrastructure to be able to support these zero emission vehicles. I think it's a huge opportunity for the state, but also, again, the speed that we need to get this zero emission infrastructure out there is going to be a challenge. And we all have to work together, as Leanne said, we need a deep collaboration between interests on the power side with the vehicle side to make sure we do this in a way that supports everyone.
Thanks, Patty. So Cynthia, you're sitting there overseeing the largest municipally owned utility. You're where the rubber hits the road on this. What do you think the biggest challenge we're facing in California on achieving our goals?
Well, I certainly don't disagree with anything that's already been said. I would just say from the perspective of an operating utility, the one that holds up electric utilities from getting to 100% is ensuring that we have that last 10% of clean zero emission power generation to achieve the reliability during, rare but extreme weather situations. And the fact is, moving forward, they may not be quite as rare. The LA 100 study that is almost complete had NAREL looking at, if and how we get to 100% renewables. And one of the challenges that's unique to LADWP, and that would impact the pace and how we achieve our renewable and zero emissions goals, is that wind, solar generation, that would account for about 71 to 80% of total renewable energy requirements by 2045. The last 10%, though, is the most difficult to integrate. And there we're going to need, as has been previously said, a lot of additional investment in infrastructure. We're also going to need investment in energy storage resources, and in additional technologies that may be the answer but aren't quite there, like hydrogen and things of that nature. So for us, it's getting to the point where we can be operational, where, as you say, the rubber meets the road.
Thanks so much. And Mary, you're the one responsible at your agency for making sure it all comes together seamlessly. So sitting at CAISO, what do you think the biggest challenge we're facing on our zero emission and renewable power goals are?
Well, I think the others hit on it. I mean, the political and social will to get it done is critical. And the sense of urgency Patty talked about, because sometimes people, if they can't see it, they don't think it needs to be done. But ISO is different in that I think that the renewable integration is key. and it's an area that needs a lot more work. And this whole issue of transmission and how we're going to integrate the renewables into our transmission system and get to the places where the renewable power is, which brings us to the Western grid and an understanding that there is an interdependency in the West and probably the entire country. But if we could just organize the West, that would be awesome. Because as you know, wind blows at different times of the day in Wyoming and Utah and other places, and the sun shines in other places. And the more collaborative that is, the better off we'll be in getting to our 100% goals.
Thanks, Mary. So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to direct a question to Leanne. So, we're doing great, on our zero emission goals. We've made tremendous progress, but what we've seen in California, unfortunately, particularly in the pandemic, is that actually our air quality is continuing to worsen, particularly in frontline communities. And so a tough one for you, Leanne, is how do we make sure that CARB can work with frontline communities so we continue to make progress?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have substantially reduced air pollution in California from its historic highs, but there's absolutely a lot more that needs to be done. And, the history of structural and institutional racism and land use decisions that have been made over the years have disproportionately burdened some communities with pollution and with the impacts of climate change. So we need to be thinking about how we prioritize those communities. And so one of our key tools is the AB 617 Community Air Protection Program. And this is really a first of its kind program where we partner with communities and local air districts to develop strategies and tools. And so a key focus of my work as I'm getting started in this job is making sure that that program is as effective as possible. And it's very challenging because the program involves selecting communities and working with residents and the air districts in those communities, and there's never enough funding to choose all of the communities. So it's kind of a two-pronged strategy in the sense that we work directly with the communities with air monitoring plans and emission reduction plans, but we also use that process to identify strategies that can really be scaled and shared with other areas of the state. So whether they're, enforcement strategies or other strategies that really can, even for communities that aren't specifically selected to develop an air protection program, they can use those strategies to improve their communities. We also disperse community air grants that help community-based organizations build capacity to identify, evaluate, and reduce air pollution and exposure to emissions. So we really are leaning into that with our new Deputy Executive Officer for Environmental Justice and her staff to really partner with communities and make progress on those key air quality issues in our communities.
Thank you. Patty, switching over to transportation for a while, it's been a pretty exciting year. The last 12 months, we had Governor Newsom issue an executive order, amazing executive order, to transition to 100% zero emission cars by 2035 and 100% trucks by 2045. It's groundbreaking and really setting the frame for the rest of the country. So how are we doing on achieving this goal? And how can we accelerate it while at the same time making sure that we have good jobs for our workers?
Well, let me start by saying, it has been an amazing year. It's been a roller coaster. Last year we had the Trump administration basically thumbing its nose at California saying, you can't have vehicle standards. And, and Governor Newsom really took a strong leadership position, not just in the United States, but globally with the announcement that California was going all in on zero emission transportation. And, I got to say, I was like, well, that's an ambitious, marker. And now, what we've seen is that everybody's lining up. Everybody's sign me up for that. So we see GM aligning with California's goal of 2035 having all electric vehicles. We see Ford saying in the EU, hey, by 2030, we're doing it. And not just with passenger vehicles, but also commercial vehicles as well. We see Volvo saying they're going to be 100% electric by 2025. I mean, it's mind blowing for me, having been in transportation for 25 years, a long time, a long time. I just feel like very excited about where we're going. And, next year, Ford is going to have F-150, its best-selling vehicle is going to be electric, and it's going to have, better low-end torque, better acceleration than any of its internal combustion vehicles. So it's not like you're compromising on quality when you buy electric. You're actually getting a better vehicle. So I just feel, and on the fuel cell side, I would say, progress hasn't been as fast as battery electric, but we're going to need fuel cells, especially in the medium and heavy duty side of the equation, where I think there's some advantages that fuel cells could offer. And so, coming, together, I think we have this technological ecosystem. Again, it's a question of speed. And your question of like, how do we make sure that this is a transition that benefits workers in California, I think is a really important one. And, there's a lot of jobs when we're talking about, especially the build out of ZEV infrastructure. That's a lot of jobs in California. We're not outsourcing those. And the electricity is produced, well, not all in California, but, this is a domestic resource. We're not sending money overseas for this. So there's a job creation possibility that we really need to capitalize on and make sure that this is a job creation possibility that benefits everybody, but also that the zero emission transportation system benefits everybody. And I think that's an important, as Leanne mentioned, we got to make sure that this is an equitable solution. And it's not just what I like to call, sorry for Tesla owners, but the arugula eating, Tesla owning elite, but for everybody. This has to work for everybody.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I
you.
love my arugula, let me just say.
Yeah.
but it's this is to be a solution that works for everybody.
I'm merely a spinach eating Nissan owner, Leaf owner. So Cynthia, if Patty has her way and we have all these electric, and the governor has their way, have all these electric vehicles on the road, pushing in, pumping in, trying to pull down power from the grid. And here you are sitting in Los Angeles, which really is the center of a lot of this transformation, let's be clear. So I understand, I think we all know LADWP has to make a lot of investments in its distribution system to meet the new world that's coming. So some of the questions for you are, how are you going to do it? And what can the state and the federal government do to help you make that transition? What do you have?
Yeah, thanks for that. And LA really is the leader in a number of these areas. I know we were very proud to announce at the beginning of the year that we met our goal of installing 10,000 EV charging stations in the city of LA. And we did that 2 years ahead of time. We're well on our way to blowing through, to meeting and exceeding 25,000 by 2025. So a lot of energy, time, and resources go into maintaining our grid and making sure that it is strong and resilient. It's these issues aren't terribly sexy, but since 2013, LAPD, I'm sorry, I do that so very often. LADWP has implemented a comprehensive program to improve the reliability of the grid. It's one that prioritizes asset management and capital work for every major aspect of the power system. It's mitigating problem circuits and stations based on the types of outages and equipment failures, associated with specific facilities. We're expediting the restoration of temporary repairs of equipment failures and targeting circuits that contribute heavily to our reliability indices. There's a great deal of proactive maintenance and capital improvements, and making sure that our replacement cycles align with asset life cycles, including the replacement of overloaded distribution transformers and worn underground cables, et cetera. And that's just to keep the system, up and moving. By way of an example, some of our targets are for this fiscal year to replace 3,500 power poles, 10,000 cross arms, 850 transformers, 50 miles of underground cable, and 20 electrical volts. When we start to look at the infrastructure that we need to decarbonize, our grid, and the increases in the amount of distributed energy resources on electric distribution infrastructure. We're seriously ramping up our planning efforts. We are identifying and addressing our current and future distribution feeder overloads. We're also working to make sure that we can strategically deploy DREs by location or based on planned upgrades or distribution circuits to address increased energy demand. The renewable transformation won't work if we're not resilient. And I guess the most significant example is of our investment in a sustainable future is, as I mentioned before, the near completion of what is a groundbreaking study to determine what investments should be made to achieve a 100% renewable energy supply. In terms of what the state and federal government can do for us, state assistance for EV programs. Our power system reliability program upgrades are funded through our customer electric rate structure, but state funding's been essential for the expansion of our EV vehicle infrastructure. Also, more state assistance, to help our customers who are otherwise unable to transition to electric vehicles is something that we could use more of. We'll be looking to the state and federal government for assistance as we transition or as we upgrade our infrastructure. In addition to economic assistance for upgrading infrastructure, we're also looking for and are going to frankly need a great deal of flexibility and help in streamlining through CEQA and other permitting hurdles, the actual siting and construction of new transmission systems. I'll leave it there. There's a lot more, but that kind of on a high level sums up what we're looking at.
Great, thank you. Important to note that these things do require environmental permitting. So this is an issue California just needs to figure out. Mary, I want to turn to you. You've been such a leader in promoting at the LABC in promoting solar and distributed power, right? And so, see from that perspective, how does that fit into your work at CAISO, which has really more been focused on large-scale renewable power? So how do we get more of a distributed generation network to help out, Cynthia, in trying to get enough power to fuel up all of these vehicles that are going to be up and down Los Angeles?
Well, it's a great question, my favorite question. And I want to just start by a shout out to DWP, who I think is really, really, not only has it made LA City the #1 solar city in the United States, but I think it's actually providing a roadmap for how you do the full integration faster, better, more efficient. So I just want to say that, Cynthia, having been on the DWP board myself and having watched it really the last 15 years, I just think that DWP has really stepped up to solve these problems and done a great job. So also the DG in the DWP territory has done a bunch of other things. It's been equitably distributed. It has brought new jobs and investment. It's reduced carbon emissions, and it's created resiliency. So I also think it's a test case for why renewables work, right? And when you come up to the ISO, this was one of my first questions of the ISO. What exactly is going on with renewable integration, right, on our state grid? So I'm happy to say that over the last 10 years, that the ISO grid has integrated 12 gigawatts of large-scale solar and 6 gigawatts of behind-the-meter solar, which I don't think a lot of people really know. Now, the issue is the ISO has to have visibility and dispatch control. These are the key issues for the ISO. And the ISO has to adapt its forecasting as well to be able to see the solar particularly when there's clouds or bad weather, so that they're able to perform well and provide grid reliability. The ISO wholesale market prices have been adapted to the DG solar patterns, which is a good sign, because market designs have been created for DG solar. So this also adapts to when we need solar and when we don't need solar. So the prices will vary. But the truth is that ISO is in the wholesale business, not in the retail business. So we rely on the PG&Es and the Edisons and the others to set their own prices. ISO has developed distributed energy resource aggregation and modeling to bring in DG power into our balancing and ancillary services, which means we've created new markets for solar. They have nothing to do with energy and everything to do with how we run the system. So this is also, I think, really something that ISO can be proud of. So proud of that basically FERC Order 2222, and now I'm getting in the weeds, was modeled after the ISO program. I know, I'm going into NerdFest time, but for those of you who are interested, you're gonna hang in there with me. Now, Order 2222 sets the tone for the entire United States. So that's like saying something that we developed here in California was worthy of the entire country, okay? So it's making the solar market more viable, more robust, more appealing to investors, which I think is a huge issue. The other thing about it is that it's part of a regional solution. The EIM, which I pray, Cynthia, you will be in soon with the DWP, that you're joining us here in the Western Grid, and then the potential day ahead market that we're working on over the next few years. So that will be integrating 5% of our energy now in the Western Grid, and then potentially upwards of 100% of our energy in the Western Grid. So that's a long answer, Cecilia.
Long answer. It's cool.
But it's an interesting answer, because the good news is I think that ISO is poised to be part of the solution, will be part of the solution, and is part of the solution.
All right. Well, so just in the last 25 minutes, we've gone super broad, all over the map, and super wonky, which means it's been a successful webinar as far as I'm concerned. So I want to actually, give you guys a chance to respond more generally to some questions and talk actually to each other. So there are 3 issues that have sort of come up in your responses as well as in the chat box. And I'm going to see if we can get through any of these. One is Patty talked about wildfires, right? We're coming up on the summer, so that's one I want to hit. Another is really around equity and making sure that everybody benefits from the transition to a clean energy economy, whether that means jobs or pollution reductions loads come down. And then the last one is just, how do we make sure we build our way out of this recession with good paying jobs? So let me hit the first one and see if you guys want to comment, like, how are we doing preparing for wildfire season, which as far as I can tell is pretty much 10 months out of the year, as near as I can tell. And I'll send that to anybody who wants to talk about it on a brief response. Are we in good shape heading into what's probably going to be another tough fire season? Or nobody wants to talk about it?
Well, I can kick it off, just probably the one with sort of one of the least sort of regulatory levers around wildfire. But I think this is a good example of the kind of the whole of government concept that people talk about a lot, right? Like, there's so much we all need to be doing and that we are doing. All the resiliency work that's going on with both the publicly owned utilities and the investor owned utilities, hardening their system and trying to be ready for our new sort of weather reality. The work that CARB is doing with local air districts in terms of figuring out better ways to monitor and notify people about how the smoke is affecting their daily lives. That's important. Thinking about how do we make sure that there are opportunities to do, forest management, prescribed burns, having that activity be sort of kind of monitored and dealt with in our rubric of air quality regulatory structure. So there's just a lot to do. And I think that there's a lot of good work and communication that's happening throughout the state and local governments.
Thanks, Leanne. Anybody want to take a shot at that? Cynthia, go
Yeah,
ahead.
the thing that I'll say about that, even though it's, obviously GWP's primary, service territory is not significantly impacted by wildfires. That said, we've got transmission everywhere. And so it becomes a factor for us as well. And to Leanne's point, we spend a lot of resources hardening the system and making sure that we, can withstand whatever dangers might arise. In addition to that, the department, I just have to say it because they were so very proud of it, and it was an important feature with respect to the last set of rolling blackouts during the state. LADWP not only did not suffer, but was able to actually put energy on the grid to mitigate the issues that were happening elsewhere in the state. And I think that, to Mary's point, the interconnectedness of all of our resources and resource management and electricity management is so very critical as we look at the impacts of climate change. There's really no way to escape it, whether you're in the middle of a fire, sort of wildfire danger zone or not. There's a significant impact statewide and a significant role to play. And as far as I know, everyone is doing all that they can to step up to inoculate customers from these kinds of terrible things moving forward.
Thanks, Cynthia. Well, let me go to the transition to the clean energy economy and making sure that the benefits are shared equitably, equally, right? So we talked a little bit about frontline communities suffering, continuing to suffer from poor air quality. But Patty also noted that all the infrastructure we need to build just for the charging and for the infrastructure for vehicles is enormous. Those should be good paying jobs. So sort of an open question to anybody who wants to respond. Couple things. One, how do we make sure that clean vehicles get to everyone and not just the arugula eating Tesla drivers? And two, how do we make sure that the infrastructure necessary to charge those vehicles gets built by folks who need good quality jobs in communities of color, frontline communities who are suffering the most from the dirty energy economy? Patty, looks like you want to tap in.
I do. I think on the Clean Cars for All, I'll leave that for Leanne. That's CARB's bailiwick on how do we make sure that the vehicles get into the hands of consumers. On the build out of the ZEV infrastructure, I would also like to say that we want to make sure that communities benefit directly from the investments we're making as a state. And we've committed with the funds that we manage at the Energy Commission, about $100 million per year, that half of those funds are going to provide benefits to disadvantaged and low income communities. And we're actually wrestling with what does that mean to provide a benefit, because there's definitely a benefit from the build out of that infrastructure. As you said, Cecilia, good jobs in that just the build out phase. But also, what does it mean to benefit? I mean, is reduced air pollution, is that enough of a benefit? Is enhanced mobility? Does enhanced mobility have to be part of that benefit? That's a discussion we're having. It's a live discussion, and I got to say, it's not easy to come up with like simple criteria for what a benefit is, but it's something that we're wrestling with and we take very seriously. And I look forward to input from the Disadvantaged Communities Advisory Group, which advises us, and the Public Facilities Commission and other stakeholders, because we really do want to make sure this is a benefit for everybody, but especially communities, frontline communities that are suffering disproportionately from air pollution and economically. These are the same communities that are suffering from COVID-19. I mean, we have to do a better job as a state because we're not there. We're not equitable as a state, and so we need to tailor our investments to make sure we're really attentive to those challenges.
Yeah, I think Patty makes some great points. So CalSTART did a study that attributed 70,000 jobs to the zero emission infrastructure and vehicle market in the state of California, which is awesome and will grow exponentially in future years, I'm sure. So making sure that people have access to those jobs is really important. To Patty's point about the vehicles, we have Clean Cars for All. We have the just recently we took the remaining $25 million in the vehicle rebate program and focused it all on low income customers, and so making sure those vehicles get pushed out. But also, in the heavy duty space and the medium duty space, to Patty's point about benefits, the air quality benefits come really fast when you are dealing with larger vehicles and larger engines, and figuring out a way to push out that infrastructure is vehicles is so important. And there's opportunities, like for instance, we've been doing a lot of work in the agricultural sector in terms of transitioning those vehicles over, which is an area of the state that's hardest hit by poor air quality and by COVID-19, and looking at ways that we can target specific areas and really see some reductions, and sort of knocking on the door of the federal administration and kind of saying, okay, what are some opportunities to fund some work in this area in California?
Great. I think Mary and Cynthia, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, no, I was just going to give a shout out because I saw that J.R. DeShazer is on this call, and not to get in front of it, but we have a clean transportation equity study that we're about to release at the end of this month that JR did in partnership with our institute. And we did it because, Patty, of the governor's edict and what that would mean, and helping develop some metrics around equity and this issue. And it tracks with a lot of what you just said and Leanne just said about how we're going to know whether or not it's successful for everyone, right? And so a lot of the recommendations are on the incentives and the infrastructure side, meaning that we don't have any incentives for used vehicles, for instance, used electric vehicles, which are most likely the ones that people in all communities would be interested in, and that the infrastructure charging needs to be more integrated, and that just pilots need to be more available in all communities to understand what this technology is and what it means, and how clean manufacturing can be incentivized in California in general, and then tied to workforce development in communities that would like these new jobs. So that's just a preview of what this study will say, but Cynthia, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, as municipal utility, we really do believe that we have a unique and critical both role and obligation to ensure that we generate equity throughout our entire service area. And at DWP, we already have and have had for some time now an equity metrics, which is, even as I speak, under review to make sure that it is sharp enough and focused enough in measuring the right things. But literally, we look at all of our investments through the lens of equity. That obviously includes where we cite, for instance, things like EV charging stations. But equity really requires a broad lens, a lot of painstaking work, focus, and determination. So it's not just, are we installing the infrastructure? We actually have a pilot program, I am sure partnered with or funded through one of the two agencies that are one of either CARB or CEC, where we had EV or electric vehicle ride sharing or car sharing in and around LA, and specifically in communities of color. We pilot other kinds of transit vehicles in communities of color just to get people used to the technology and thinking about it. But in addition to that, we're an employer. And DWP, in collaboration with IBEW, Local 18, and community groups, in particular Repower LA, have had a program called the UPTC training program for some time. And it was recently evaluated by a professor at UC Irvine and hailed as a model partnership between labor, community, and a public sector employer for what it was able to accomplish. We're ramping up that program. We'll be talking a lot about it as we move through the remainder of this year. But making sure that as an employer, there are opportunities for people from affected communities that have been left out, overlooked, or overburdened to work at the department is a huge part of the equity agenda that we've embraced. We're recruiting everywhere. We are looking very hard at people that do business with us and looking at their workforces and looking at and in constant communication about how we ensure that those dollars are leveraged in a way that we produce fairness. And then I just want to go a little further than that, because when we talk about equity, and again, we supply water and power, access to those commodities in and of themselves is an equity issue. And making sure that we're making the kinds of investments that reduce the cost of those resources, and that we are supporting programs that ensure that poor people receive water, power as a matter of right, not as a commodity that they get only if they've got the money to pay. And then finally, I'll say, and then I'll let this go, but we talk about jobs, we talk about, sort of access to services, but as we look at what really equity means in this space, it means access to entrepreneurial opportunity. And I don't think we've come close to cracking that, because that's where real wealth and real resources are built. And as you think about, as leaders in this industry, what our real obligations are, if we want to see fundamental change, it's thinking about equity at all those levels. So access to commodities and these resources, access to jobs, but also access to opportunity to thrive within this brand new industry that's being built as we speak. So I'm pretty passionate about this one. And the department is very committed, as is the entire city of LA, to being substantive in how we address matters of equity.
Cynthia, thank you for mentioning all those points. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and just give a big shout out for LADWP on that utility pre-craft training program. It is a national model of trying to make sure that we open up the doors to good paying union jobs to communities, to low income communities of color. It's really been a model, and it's been built with community and labor support. So I know that the Biden administration has looked closely at that, and I'm hopeful that if there is an infrastructure package that gets out of Congress, that it will probably have something similar like that. I also want to thank you for mentioning entrepreneurship. We're still in a capitalist society, and it's really important to build wealth that way. So I know you've been a leader in that. You're the former head of the National Association of Women Business Owners in Los Angeles chapter, and that's really been important to see the spend for women and minority businesses actually share in this billions of dollars of investment that we're going to be making publicly to make this transition happen. So we're at the magic 10:45 hour. We've gotten some amazing, I don't know if y'all have been monitoring the chat. It's been great. I mean, there's some terrific questions in here. So I have the unenviable task of trying to put together a couple out of some terrific questions. You know what, I'm going to throw in a question around, let's see. Let's talk, well, we already talked a little bit about best practices, but maybe one question might be around equity metrics. You mentioned some, Cynthia, that LADWP has put into place. Patty, Leanne, Mary, if you have any other thoughts around how do we measure if we're actually achieving equitable outcomes as we do this transition. And I think that hits, certainly the environmental circumstances, environmental outcomes, as well as labor and business outcomes. So I don't know if you guys have some thoughts on that and how your agencies might be measuring that today. Or if there are best practices you've seen elsewhere that we should hold up. Come on, somebody. All right. There we
Well,
go.
I think when you start talking about equity, you know, among you, sometimes the lens that you're using makes a huge difference. And so in looking at equity as it relates to, say, passing out light bulbs, because I mean, at DWP, we're very granular and we look at everything and making sure that there's an equitable distribution with respect to, you know, free light bulbs or water heads or whatever. And you look at it from the perspective of the benefit as it relates to lowering energy costs, it's like a home run. However, when you start to look at it from the perspective of savings to the customer, which is a whole different lens, it takes you to a different place. And you start to look at your investments in things like weatherization, and in particular, weatherization of multiple family, low-income residences. That kind of deep dive work that you can do not only creates a significant benefit from a carbon emissions and from a conservation perspective, but it also you know, gives you a significant benefit to those residents who now are seeing significantly lower bills. And I think that often when we look at equity, we really look at, you know, we look at those things from the perspective of equitable you know, equal benefit as it relates to reducing carbon emissions, which is great. But we need to be looking at other measures, that go directly to how does this affect the actual bottom line of the people that are receiving these benefits. Because, you know, if I'm in a community that's without assets, or if I'm poor, I need more than just clean air. I need to be able to live. And so for me, it's not just it's not just doing things that are equal, but being thoughtful about the specific things that we're doing to make sure that we're getting the most bang for the buck for the end user, in addition to for the environment.
Yeah, it looks like Patty and Mary
So
want to.
yeah, I just want to build on that for a second, because you know what, I'm new to state government. I've only been in it for 2 years. And, you know, what I realize is that we tend to focus on things that are easy to measure. So it's really easy to measure how much money is going into and we have these very specific definitions, right? Disadvantaged and low income communities, which I actually don't like those terms, because I know folks have used the term priority communities. That sounds a lot better to me, but we have all these like state definitions that we have to use. And you know, so what I'm interested in is these more difficult to measure metrics around equity. And, you know, some of this comes to, like, when we're talking transportation, you have to go to a community and see, like, well, what do they need for their mobility, and how can the state funds be used to meet those needs? And so, you know, you have to invest in planning grants, which then you, like, does that count as a benefit? I don't know. You know, it gets really, it's in the world of, like, how do we have these good metrics to evaluate? Sometimes it gets really hard. And I would say we have to lean in on these hard things that where we don't have easy ways to measure them, but where we know it's really important that we really focus in on what the community needs, and then using our state funds to provide it in a way that also meets our state goals around zero emission vehicle infrastructure and vehicle deployment. So I just think it's worth the struggle, but we don't necessarily have like this like checkbox of this is, you know, it's so much easier just to count money going into the community.
Yeah, Patty, I want to pick up that notion that, like, the harder thing is a transformational moment. So let's not just accept the world as it is, that we're all, that the measure of equity is, do you have a single family vehicle? Isn't it really mobility? Isn't it access and freedom of movement and access to opportunity, mobility? So there's some questions in the chat box about micro mobility and how do we measure it and all of that. So I'm loving the chat box. Mary and Leanne, you guys want to tap in? I also want to, Kristen Pauling posed a really interesting question on equity around the pandemic's hit women of color harder than anybody. is there any way we could address that as we come out of the climate? I just thought that was an awesome question. Mary Leanne, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that what we've learned about equity in the last 10 or 15 years is like that you have to approach it on the design side and then measure by impact, right? So a lot of what was said that we couldn't do, it turned out we totally could do, right? So whether it was energy efficiency in buildings, you know, being more expensive and people not wanting to do it. Well, it turns out if you design it right from the very beginning and plan right, it's really not that hard to do. And in fact, there's tremendous benefits in doing it, right? And that the impact is really the benefits and how you're going to measure them, right? So when you go to design something to be equitable, you got to start at the beginning. You can't start tacking it on in the middle of the end. So you said you did it, right? It has to be holistic from the beginning. So that's why I think the governor's edict on zero emission cars and trucks is so important, that we're upfront on the metrics for equity, that the design of the program makes sense to everyone, right? Because already the goals for that program may or may not make sense to people. I mean, not to be like that, but you know what I mean? That's the key. And that the impacts and the benefits that you're seeing are meaningful to you. So meaningful impacts, our definition of that is that it brings real investment. It brings real high paying jobs. It reduces carbon emission, right? They're more holistic, how you're going to judge the program, right? So anyway, I just think the concept of designing up front and then knowing what your measurable benefits are more holistically is a way to go, another way to go.
Go ahead, Leanne.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that is sort of one of the things that's been really great about being really intentional is trying to do it from the very beginning and trying not to overlay equity onto programs that already exist. And the other, I just, you know, a couple of people in the chat were talking about this, but, you know, I think sometimes we forget how far ahead California is in this area. Like, you know, just even the basics of, you know, CalEnviroScreen is like, you know, nothing anybody else has. I mean, the federal government has sort of a weak tea kind of version that, and, you know, they need to step up and also sort of try to, you know, do more of this work nationwide to understand what the reality is out there, and which shows you where your potential opportunities can be.
I'm going to do one more question out of the chat box, and then I'm going to give you the final lightning round question. So I think this came from, well, anyway, what role will air districts play in some of the issues we've discussed today? And what support can we expect from them on the goals that we've talked about today? I'll note, I think Wendy James somewhere in the chat box was also talking about the composition of the air districts, not to put too fine a point on it. So anybody want to respond to the air district role, and what can we expect from, what should we expect from them?
Well, I think I would say a couple things. You know, I really do, as I mentioned earlier, sort of building that kind of community engagement with, you know, community groups, CARB, air districts around specific emission reduction concepts and strategies is going to be a key focus of CARB going forward, 617 program, and in other ways. I think, you know, stationary sources do provide a lot of emissions, but mobile sources are, which is sort of our bailiwick, is kind of a big deal. And so, you know, kind of getting to that intersection of watching air districts look at indirect source rules, which we feel they absolutely have the authority to do, even though some argue that they don't, and you know, encouraging them to deploy those strategies, I think is a good opportunity where we can engage with air districts and support their work. And you know, I hear you. The districts vary quite a bit in their in their strategies and how they interact. But to the extent we can lift up sort of the best programs and the best regulatory strategies for these air districts to employ, and spread the word, the better.
Indirect source rule on warehousing. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. I want to give you guys a chance for a lightning round. This is important. You know, we finally have the American Recovery Act has come through. Terrific. I know all eyes are now focused on the prospect of an infrastructure package coming out of the federal government. So this is a fun final question for each of our panelists. If you could get your package in a bow, the number one gift that you would like from the Biden administration and Congress in an infrastructure package, what would it be? And I know you're not going to just say one, but please give me at least just try to keep it to less than, 10. Anyway, what are the top few investments that you would say you would like to see happen for us in California in an infrastructure package? Who wants to go first? All right, Leanne, you go.
Okay, so my first one, and I will do one, I will be very focused, is, and this gets to the intersection of effective air quality regulation and equity, which is, a lot of the heavy duty vehicles are run by individual independent contractors who are kind of, working with a narrow margin. If we could get some federal funds to get more of those folks into zero emission vehicles, that would be awesome. We could improve air quality and benefit people's livelihoods.
Thanks, Leanne. Or we could fix the misclassification rule. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm gonna, because I'm pairing with Leanne. We're doing like a little dance here, which is, and I'm gonna stick with one too. I want the federal government to be a partner in building out zero emission vehicle infrastructure, refueling infrastructure. That's the big opportunity. I mean, it's not, so it's transportation number one source of emissions in California for global warming pollution. It's also the number one source federally, and electricity emissions are going like this, transportation is going like that. So we got to deal with it. It's a jobs issue. It's an opportunity to partner with the federal government on a big infrastructure play. So that's my number one ask.
Thanks, Patty. Mary.
They could streamline and expedite transmission for us to help us with a national grid. That would be terrific, and help pay for it. We would accept that willingly. Yeah, because what's basically happened is the cost of building out transmission has increased dramatically over the last few years, and we really haven't built that much, which is the sad truth for a lot of the reasons you mentioned earlier, Cecilia, dealing with environmental issues that have made it really slow and time consuming.
Thanks, Mary. And Cynthia, you get the last word on this lightning round. Oh, wait, you're on mute. How did that happen? Cynthia, you've been
there, fixed it. Sorry, I was going to say first I'll associate myself with the comments related to grid infrastructure and permitting issues. That's a desperate need for us. But at the department, we're really focused on getting to 100% renewable so that we can, be the backbone for everything else that folks are talking about. And so in that regard, what we need is a stable source, as I indicated, of dispatchable zero carbon fuel. And so, investment in research in the development of those fuels, investment in specifically, we're very interested in hydrogen technology, investment in batteries and the other kinds of things that we need to get to 100% would be what we'd be looking for. I'd add to that, we'd be also looking for additional resources to support our customers as we come out of the pandemic. And, we were very supportive of the first COVID relief bill, in particular, those funds that were able to go to utility services. And we're looking forward to seeing that happen again.
Thank you, Cynthia. I want to thank all of our panelists. What a great discussion. I also want to thank the folks on the chat box. There have been incredible resources that have been dropped in this chat box. I'm hoping we can capture them. Thank you, everybody who's joined us today. This was a wonderful panel. We have terrific energy coming out of the darkest days of COVID. Let's keep it going and let's find that clean energy future. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Cecilia.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.